So we're back on the Sport Trac looking at the brakes. So standard factory setup. This one is a dual piston caliper. The fronts actually aren't too bad for making a little bit of noise. I'm wondering if there's just a backing plate or something that's slipped. So these actually aren't too bad. We're going to be replacing it with the drilled and slotted rotors, which help with heat dissipation, and some of it just cosmetic. We got the powder coated caliper, again the dual piston. Most of this is going to be cosmetic. The reason why I went with this is when I priced out the complete kit together, ordering it all, versus getting all the parts individually for rebuilding the factory system, it wasn't that much more to go with this. So, you know, might as well, if you've got it, kind of make it a little bit fancier, make it your own. Taking a look at the rear. The rear's in a little bit rougher shape, so we've got some grooves here. It's hard to see on the video, but there is a pretty big rust ridge right here. You can't see on the back side very well. Let's see if I can get the camera up in here. So we've got some pretty bad grooving. Again, hard to see in the camera on the back side of that rotor. This side being even worse. Yeah, not really a good vantage point other than just seeing. Let's see. So they were definitely due to be replaced anyway. Again, we are doing the drilled and slotted. There's a couple of different ways to do the parking brake on these. One of them is in the caliper. When you pull the lever, it'll pinch your pads just like the regular caliper will, and then when you let go, it releases it. This one has basically a drum style. On the inside, when you pull your parking brake, it activates and holds here. So they're two different units. A lot of that is going to change on how your brakes compress. Let me get this one open and out. If you're ever taking a look at a rear single piston caliper, generally speaking, if it's open like that in the center and just a smooth face, that one you can just compress and the piston we're treating to the caliper. If that's flush with 2 or 3 or sometimes 4 now holes in it, generally that's one that you have to turn in, and generally that's going to be a parking brake that's held by the caliper as opposed to being the drum style. Not always, but generally speaking. So when you pull your caliper off, if you see that, don't try compressing it. You can really damage the caliper, turn an easy brake job into a more difficult one. This one, again, as long as the parking brake lets go the way that I need it to, this job should be pretty easy. Essentially, just take off the old, put on the new. On the back one, we've got our 2 pivot bolts, or our 2 slider bolts. Take that off, pull the caliper off, put all the new stuff on. And then to switch the hydraulics, we've got our banjo bolt right here. You pop that off. The sooner you can get that back on, the less fluid you're going to lose. We're going to have to bleed the brakes anyway. Coming up to the front, this one has a dedicated bracket, so we'd take the caliper off, and then we actually take the bracket off, and then same thing, we're just going to go ahead and replace everything. Banjo bolt on this one's on the face. Always make sure that your bleeder is on top. You know, when you're bleeding out, you want to get all the air out. You can't get all the air out if the bleeder's on the bottom. Air obviously naturally wants to rise. Tried and true method, have everybody help you. You know, 3 pumps, hold and bleed it. They do have some fancy equipment these days that make it a little bit easier if you have it, but there's nothing wrong with the 3 pump and hold. We're going to go ahead and start at the rear brakes. First thing we've got to do is get everything apart. Now, one of the things that I like to do, and it depends on your braking system, we talked about how the calipers are going to compress. And this style, I know I can just push them in, that I don't need to spin them to retract them. So what I'll do is get a pry bar of some sort, come in on the inside of the caliper here, and if you can grab the edge of the rotor, I know I'm changing all this, so I don't worry about the condition of it. If you can get in here and then give a little bit of a pry, you can get those calipers pretty well compressed before you even get everything else off. So we're going to go ahead and do that. This particular brake style does have the brake shoes, or the brake pads are clipped on, so they're not going to move very well. I'm only going to be able to compress that so far, but I've got that started. The next step is when we pop off the calipers, get all the parts replaced, and then we'll put the new caliper on. So after fighting with the rear and that parking brake, getting all that together, we're going to focus on the fronts. Front should be a little bit easier. Again, so we're going to have the pin bolts here. On the inside, we're going to have the caliper bracket bolt. and then everything should come right off. The rotors are already kind of loose. So we'll play with this one. Hopefully this goes a bit easier than the last set. As predicted, that side came off much easier. While we have it apart, we're going to take a look at the rest of the stuff. Looking at the wheel bearing, there's no real indication that there's a lot of metal coming out there. Looking at the speed sensor, this one is not built into the wheel speed, or not built into the wheel bearing. It is a separate piece. The wiring all looks good. Again, no metal shavings or anything packed around there. I wasn't getting that kind of noise. It doesn't feel grindy when I spin it, so we should be good there. So I've got everything off. Next step is to install new. All right, so working on the rear gave me a little bit of an issue. This style, like I said before, does have the parking brake. That's the drum style. And whether it was just froze up or just a rust ridge on the inside of the old rotor, fought like a Dickens to try and get that off. But a couple extra hands, some usage of a sledgehammer and a pry bar, we got them off. So now we're back to where we can install new. We're taking a look at the rails here. Again, this one does not have the standalone bracket. That's all part of the knuckle itself. So this one's going to have some drop-in slider pins. Again, that's what the brake pads are actually going to ride on, and we make sure that we get those full installed and lubricated when we're ready to go. So again, a little bit of work with a hammer to get those shaped to fit, and then we can start putting everything back together again. All right, so after a little bit of a struggle, I do have the rears finished, and they're all together. Yeah, I had a little bit of trouble lining up some of the hoses, but we're all good. We're sprayed clean. Now, one thing with the slotted and drilled rotors, there's a lot of up in the air about which direction they should go. So the research that I've done and what I've been running and works for me is it's not the face that makes the difference, it's the vents. This particular one doesn't have vents. On the front, the vents are straight. Now, if you had the vents or the vanes, as some would call them, if they're angled, then you want that to kind of eat the air, so to speak. So my front ones are straight, so it doesn't really matter. These are solid rotors. There's no vent, so this one doesn't matter. These don't really make a difference in the performance of the rotor other than heat dissipation. That's a big idea for these. So having said that, if the vanes don't make a difference, again, I like my slot to kind of eat in this direction, so to speak, because it seems to funnel all your dust more away from the rim than it does if you do it the other way. So especially on the Fairlane, I don't seem to have the dust buildup that a lot of folks do when they run these things. Now, again, does it make an actual performance difference? Most likely not. But that's why I do it how I do it. Do your own research, see what matters to you, what benefits you. That's the way that I like to run them. This particular kit, once I put the wheels on, you're probably not going to see a whole lot. I might decide to do more of an open rim, but I know I wanted a towing truck style brake system. I knew the driver's rear caliper had already been replaced. The other ones were in pretty rough shape. The rotors were shot. The pads were in rough shape. So I was going to replace the whole system anyway. So I didn't necessarily go with something to have the fancy calipers, but the brake system as a whole is a towing and trailer rated braking system. And again, it was only about $50 more than sourcing everything locally. So I did opt for a little bit of cosmetic, but I made sure that the package was going to be geared for what I'm using the truck for. There are certain things that are okay going a little bit cheaper on. Brakes are not one of them. Brakes are a very important safety piece of your vehicle. Don't go cheap on brakes. All right, so at this point, I've got all the brakes on, and we need to bleed the system. We did replace the calipers, so we got to make sure there's no air trapped in there. There's a couple of different ways to do it. The one part that's going to be the same is you always want to start with the caliper furthest away from the master. So master cylinder is going to be up usually on the driver's side of the firewall. You've got some vehicles that are down low, and that's going to change things. But generally speaking, that's what you're going to be after. So your bleed sequence is going to go passenger rear, driver's rear, passenger front, driver's front. And that ensures any air that's in the system will be able to force its way up out the master cylinder, and then you'll have a good firm pedal. So I've got my lovely assistant in the vehicle, and again, kind of standard rule is, 1, 2, 3, hold on the last pedal. Whoever's at the caliper opens it up, closes it, and you do that until you get nothing but fluid out. If you have something where, say, you had to replace a line all the way up, what I've had luck with is open up that bleeder valve, put your finger over the end of it to be like a flapper valve, and have somebody just push the pedal like 10, 11, 12 times, whatever, and then you don't have to just keep doing the 3 hold to get the air out. You just hold your finger over that until you get fluid out, crank it down, then you start doing regular bleed sequence. So they've got some one-person kits that put a hose from the bleeder screw into a vat of fluid, so when you let off the pedal, it's going to suck fluid back up instead of air. There's a few different ways, but this is the tried and true method. This is what I've used, and it continues to work. All right, so I've got everything installed, all the wheels put back on. It's actually a little while later. I've got about 500 miles or so on the kit. Everything's been working pretty well. No pulsation, no pulling, everything's good and smooth. I have pulled a couple of trailers with it. I'm towing some vehicles and whatnot. Everything is working just like I need it to, no heat issues. I can actually see more of it through the rims than I thought I was going to. I was still trying to decide what I'm going to do with the wheels themselves. But ultimately, it was just a brake job. Fighting with those the rear calipers with the parking brake did add a little bit of time to it overall. Pardon the plane going overhead. But for something as simple as a brake job, it did kind of change the attitude of the truck a little bit. So wrapping up another video. Again, as always, I end it the same way. I do appreciate everybody that takes the time out of their day to watch my ramblings. Feel free to hit that like, hit a subscribe, whatever. It lets me know that these are worth doing for everybody else. The projects I've got left for the rest of this season are kind of minor. And then for season 3, I've already started doing some filming with some bigger projects. And I have 1 or 2 surprises that hopefully are going to materialize this time. But again, should be just after the holiday season. Hope everybody had a very safe and blessed holiday. I'll see you next time.